is Pew and Beyond, episode 8. I can't believe that. Like, wow. And so Leanne Matthews is watching. Morning, Leanne. Welcome. Just waiting. You know, we've got 8 people gathering. So welcome, everyone. We're really glad to see you. This is Pew and Beyond, episode 8. And our guest is PILAR Gateman, the Executive Officer and Archdeacon of Calgary. And as always, this is a conversation that we want to have with you. And so we encourage you to put your questions, your thoughts, just even register your presence in the comment section and say hello, so we can say hello to you. And we would love to hear from you. And I'm just going to turn my phone volume down because I'm hearing that. That's better. So welcome, everyone. We've got some people. I got 12 people already. Welcome. We're really excited that we're spanning almost coast to coast. We've got Nova Scotia, Quebec, and Alberta represented here today.
Yeah, just of us 3.
Amazing. Astrid Norquay is on. So for all of you joining and hopping on, there are 3 places, of course, to find this discussion. One, of course, is my website, Neil Mancor. The other is the Diocese of Nova Scotia and PEI. And Pilar, you're sharing it to yours as well. Which Facebook page is that? PILAR Gateman Work.
It is, yeah. PILAR Gateman Work, yeah.
So we're going to monitor all 3 of those. And so we'll do our best. Jeffrey Mackey says hello from Yukon. Hi, Jeffrey.
He says it's still morning, I see.
Still morning in Yukon? I can't wait. We'll have to have Jeffrey on sometime and hear about ministry in Yukon. Jeffrey and his wife, Natasha, moved up there this summer and took up ordination. He's a transitional deacon up there from Montreal. So
Angela. I know Angela from Toronto days.
Hey. And Linda Cass-Jones. Good afternoon, Linda. Nice to see you. So how many of you got looking at yours, Pilar? Got a few names?
17, I think.
Oh, fantastic.
That sounds right.
Well, that's rocking. And we got 16 in mine. 18 people are coming on. As I said, please say hello, register your presence so we can say hello to you. It's great to meet with friends from all across the country. And I think we can launch in. So my name is Neil Mancor, and I am one of my congregational development coordinator for the Diocese of Montreal. And on my phone right now, sitting below me is
Lisa Vaughn, Parish Vitality Coordinator, the Diocese of Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. And we are delighted that PILAR Gateman is with us from the Diocese of Calgary. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Pilar.
Well, first of all, I want your title. That's such a great title. Was it Parish Vitality? Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Gosh, I love that title.
A made-up title.
Yeah, well, it's a good one if you're going to make one up.
It's uplifting, isn't it? It's like vitality, yes.
Yeah, how exciting. That sounds great. Sorry, you asked me a question and I got excited about your title.
Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, let me see. I work in Calgary for the diocese, and I have a lovely husband and 3 children that I don't deserve. They are just lovely. Yeah, and I'm kind of in love with the idea of this whole conversation with you guys today, just because I feel like mission and formation is the way of the way we're going to walk into the future of whatever the church looks like. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And how many parishes do you serve?
71.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and there's it's quite a broad geographic region. So it goes from Rimbey in the very north part of our diocese all the way down to the to the southern border of the province, and then of course Saskatchewan and BC on either side. So I think it's 84,000 square kilometers. It's a pretty big spread out space.
Oh, so you do a lot of driving.
I do, yes. Not in COVID times, but yes.
No, of course not now. Yes.
Yeah.
Just to say hi, Andy O'Donnell saying hello, and Matthew Perot says hello. Good morning to you all.
Matthew's one of our coaches. Yay.
Oh, fantastic. We're looking forward to hearing all about that. So we want to hear comments about that. But tell me a bit. I was just really interested in your doctorate that you did on spiritual formation. Tell me more of what that looks like and what you did.
So yeah, so I did that at Tyndale. It's actually so I'll just do you want just the outline kind of thing, or
Yeah, whatever you think we need to know.
yeah. So it's a program that's 3.5, 4 years if you do it kind of full time, and you do 4 courses. If you're doing again full course load, you do 4 courses a year. There's one major project course every year, so something that sort of requires like 100, 120 pages each year. And then in terms of what it covers spiritual formation, obviously, but from a theological perspective, scripturally, historically, and it mingles in a lot of practical work as well at the same time. So it mingles in the actual having to, for example, have a spiritual director or do a certain practice for a period of time. It's the only one of its kind in Canada, which is kind of exciting, but also slightly depressing that there's not more of these, but hopefully we'll inspire more of them. And the other thing that's kind of interesting to know is that Yale and Princeton universities both are attempting to replicate Tyndale's model because they have visited Tyndale and looked at it and said this is a really great program. I think the thing that I've loved about it is in the cohort, but also through the coursework and with professors, that you're being formed as you're learning about formation. It's quite intentional. The whole thing is really quite intentional. So it's been a really great experience, actually. I've really loved it. I'm kind of sad it's over, actually.
It's always a letdown when it's over, but yeah. Just a couple more welcomes. I just want to welcome, Michael Larson says, Pilar's #1 fan. Good morning. So your fans are on.
I love that. That's so great.
Tepiwa Gusha from Archdiocese on, and Martin Top from Vancouver. Martin, I haven't talked to you forever, so it's nice to see you. And this, of course, is Pew and Beyond. Pew and Beyond is part of a national conversation about discipleship and mission that we are having. We're part of a group across the country of people thinking about this and looking into resources about this. So that's why we're having this conversation. And of course, we realized that Pilar and Lisa and I all met at the Vital and Healthy Parishes consultations, which the National Church ran. I guess it's like about 5 to 6 years ago. There were 3 of them.
Yeah. Was it that long ago already? Or might be longer, no? I don't know.
I think I went to one, maybe it was 2013, 14, and 15, or 14, 15, and 16. But anyways, I know that for me, those were absolutely formative experiences. And I met, both of you and plus other really great people from across the country. And you just realize there's so much going on across the country that way.
Mm. Yeah, that's one of the benefits of doing those kinds of things, right? Is having the perspective and
Yeah. But anyways, I just always wanted to say how important they were and formative they were for me. They had a huge impact. Talk to me about, we're still talking about spiritual formation. You also lead a course on spiritual autobiography, and I find that fascinating. What is that, and what do you do with that, and how do people take it?
Yeah, so, spiritual autobiography is something in our diocese anyway that we use when folks are discerning a call to ordination. And so they write a spiritual autobiography that's, 8 or 9 pages long, and they present it as one of the things that they share with their discernment groups as they move along the process. In the Tyndale doctorate, one of the first years actually of spiritual autobiography is the project course. So you end up with a much larger paper, but you also sort of experience it through other writers, right? Like St. Augustine being the first really spiritual autobiography that we have. And many others that have written spiritual autobiographies like Corrie ten Boom and several others. But the thing about spiritual autobiography, I think that everybody should be doing, actually, we should not just be saving it for those discerning a call, is that as you write the biography, you're looking you're not just saying I was born, and then this happened and then this happened. You're actually looking for the moments in your life where you have had either highs or lows or experiences where you have felt God's presence, or you're looking for those kinds of things. And what I always tell people in the discernment process is that when they're reading a spiritual autobiography, look for patterns, because God tends to use patterns in different ways with different people. Like I know what my pattern is. I know what God does to me when He's pointing me a certain direction, right? I know that from doing my spiritual autobiography, I recognized that there was a pattern that God's used in my life over the years. And so it's really helpful to discern, right? It's helpful to grow in a deeper relationship with the God who's trying to guide us, right? So it's a powerful tool, actually, in a lot of ways. But it's actually most recently I've become aware of it as a powerful tool for mission. Actually, I didn't think of it that way for a long time. I thought of it more as a discernment tool, right? A tool for deepening relationship, growing in our own formation, understanding how God forms us. But recently, it's become something interesting that I've sort of tied in. Yeah, so I've done it online a couple of times, and I've just been asked to do it again. You know, because of the pandemic, it'll have to be online. So, yeah.
And so would you recommend that for lay people as well? Lay people who are discerning too? Oh, okay.
And discerning for anything, right, Lisa? Not just a call to ordination, but actually, we're all discerning all the time, whether we're calling it that or not. You know, sometimes I lean a little too much on my own understanding, as the scripture says. But it's a tool to help us all really discern how God has worked, so that we can see how God will work, or is going to work. Yeah.
I love that. Yes. Looking at how God has worked to discern how God will work. It's absolutely right. And I love that idea of finding patterns. It's true, isn't it?
Mhm. Yeah, and the patterns are the same for you, right, Neil, as they will be for me, right? Like when you read people's autobiographies, sometimes we do it unconsciously, which is why I think spiritual autobiographies need to be written but shared with a safe group, if you know what I mean. So because it can be really quite intensely personal, but it's an important document to share with fellow believers so that they can also help you discern. Because I recognize things about myself through other people looking at my autobiography. It was an interesting experience, even with the first one I did, I don't know, 15 years ago now or something. I recognize things about my own life through other people's eyes, and it was quite powerful actually to experience that.
It's almost like that parable of the two camels walking through the desert, and they walk in pairs so one can blow the dust out of the other's eyes. Kind of, we need to have a companion to help us see clearly. So that's a really great way to approach spiritual biography. I like that.
That's a great parable. I'm not sure I knew that one, Lisa. That's great.
Astrid Norquay says we read a lot these days about telling our stories, and spiritual autobiography sounds like that. And I think in the parish context too, does that really sort of help, I don't know, open up those spiritual conversations?
Yes. Yeah, I would say for sure it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Astrid, what I would say that spiritual autobiography is like telling your story. The difference is that what makes it a spiritual autobiography is the fact that you're watching for the signs of God's action in your life, right? So you don't do that when you're first writing it. It's a reflective process, right? Mm-hmm. But it's absolutely like telling your story. It's just that you're doing it with the Holy Spirit right here on your shoulder. Yeah, that's a great comparison, actually.
Yeah, wow. I know we do that with the Revive program. It's one of the first things. It's really just a spiritual timeline, so it's not a whole autobiography. But
that's where you start.
Yeah.
Right? That's yeah. And there's some great literature out there on how to do it. It's not a difficult process in terms of the technical process of doing it. Where you're going to find the challenge is, and why it's good to do with people next to you, is that the challenge becomes what do you share, what don't you share, and then the even more challenging piece is the reflective piece, right? Looking back to say, hey, where has God acted? How has God acted? When I've been aware of it, right? Because a lot of times I was shocked at how often God had clearly been present and that I had been completely oblivious. So, good to know.
There's a very moving story in the comments. I won't go into the whole thing, but Sylvia Steele just shares a beautiful story about her mother who had done that, and then in the middle of really a catastrophe, that they were really comforted by the fact that her mother had done that. It was something that really comforted them.
Yeah.
Wow, that's a very moving story. Thanks for sharing that, Sylvia. In the midst of trauma, there was great comfort to the family that she had, in fact, done the process and understood that God had been with her through her 72 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I love the last line, Sylvia. That's fantastic. Her story has become part of my story. And that's the thing, right? That's the piece that is so powerful about us talking about these stories together. In a safe space, clearly, but knowing that none of our stories are siloed, right? We're not, your story, Lisa, is not less important than mine or than Neil's. It is we are all woven together. It's more like a fabric or a tapestry than it is just one little piece of fabric. And so that's a great story. Thank you.
Mm. Andy O'Donnell says, in a simple life, God uses bright colors. I like that.
Okay. Andrew, you're a poet.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Well, that's great. So thanks so much for that. And I know we really want to carry on this conversation about spiritual formation. We're going to, in the new year, and talk about spiritual formation and leadership as well. So check out this space in January, February for more. But I wanted to move on a bit to your missional coaching, because, there's a lot of talk about missional training, missional consultations, missional coaching, leadership cohorts, there's all sorts of things. And you have a particular approach you guys have taken in Calgary, and you trained a group of 20 missional coaches. So where did you get this idea, and what does it look like? So tell me all about how this started.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of interesting how it all came about. So the Synod, I think 2014 or 2017, I can't remember, said, hey, guys, Calgary, you need to get a missional action plan. Like, you need to do this thing, right? Which I was thrilled about. And then we began with, creating a task force, right? This is what the church does. We create task forces, which is really good in a lot of ways. So we did that, and I had a conversation with my friend Judy Paulson from Wycliffe. She's I think it's the chair of the Institute of Evangelism. I'm not sure if that's quite the right terminology. We had a conversation together, and so what she did was she used our diocese as a training ground. Really, she came and did some workshops with council, and then she offered to train us to become missional coaches. And so what that ended up looking like was us choosing, I think originally it was closer to 30 people. We've ended up with, I think, 20, 24, somewhere in there now. So there's about 30 that came to the training. And she came in person, and then we actually zoomed in long before it became popular, I think, zoomed in 6 other coaches who talked to us about particular areas to coach in. And so it was a week-long thing. It was all day for a whole week. And at the end of it, we came out with, 24, 25 missional coaches who are trained to lead workshops in 6 different areas. And I actually jotted them down to make sure I wouldn't forget. So we've got, and if the coaches are online, I think some of you are, you can correct me, you guys, but the topics were organizational culture. So how can our culture, our organizational culture, be missional? We talked about missional small groups, and that was the one that I think I was the most surprised by. There was a youth and children workshop, a communications workshop. So, what does our website say? What does our bulletin say? How do we communicate generally missionally? The personal sharing of faith one is where I've tied in the autobiography piece. But that was the learning I had afterwards. And then the community piece. So how are we missional within our context, within our community? So those are the 6 areas that were covered. And we had lay and clergy trained as coaches. And so we gathered after the training, we gathered to create workshops. And so we spent, I think, 1 or 2 sessions doing that. And then we presented in town halls across the diocese. So we have these town halls we do every year or 2. And we go to the different main areas, so sort of north, central, south of the diocese, and we present on different topics. And this one was completely about the missional coaching. And then since then, we have created online workshops, adapting to COVID as we've had to do. And we provided a couple of workshops now, and we're looking towards doing one in January. And yeah, and it's becoming what it's becoming, as we go along. So
Great. Pilar, I'm always curious about how you found the people to be coaches. Was there particular gifting? Were you looking for references? Were you just looking for volunteers or people to apply? How did that happen?
Whoever wrote me the biggest check, Lisa, that's true. No, not true. So we thought about people. Well, first of all, they had to be people who love Jesus. I mean, it doesn't make sense to pick people who are unsure of their faith, right? So these are solid people who who are involved in their parishes, involved in their own formation, involved in their own discipleship. And people who, none of them have particular training. We weren't looking sort of for, who has the gift of evangelism? We were looking for people who thought it was important to follow the Great Commission, right? To go and make disciples, but maybe didn't quite know how to do that, but were willing to try. So, these are people we knew, and we did pretty much mostly handpick people. And we tried to also make it, someone from the north, someone from, different parts of Calgary, different parts of the southern part of the diocese, and so on. So, and we did include some clergy in some way, so that there was kind of a broad spectrum of people. But the first one was really, are they wanting to share their faith but don't really know how, and do they actually feel comfortable enough in their faith that that we can have a conversation about it.
Good, excellent.
I love that line. People, you thought it was interesting to follow the Great Commission. I thought, wow, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, there it is, right? I mean, it's a mandate in a sense. Right? It's not the Great Suggestion.
No. Or the 10 suggestions, right? Yeah.
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 Just to say, everybody, this is a conversation, and I really appreciate the people who are hopping on with your comments. Do feel free to join in with your comments and questions and thoughts, because we want to hear from you. It really makes for a live conversation. And welcome to everyone. This is Q and Beyond. There's a number of people still with us, and national conversation about mission and discipleship. And having a fascinating conversation hearing from Pilar Gateman about your missional coaching. And I just think it's very interesting. I mean, so you've got these people together now. You've trained a group of 20 people. And so you've sort of talked about it a little bit, but can you unpack a bit more what their role now is in the diocese, and how is this helping?
Yeah. So
how's it going to help?
Right. Yeah. Well, that probably remains to be seen, really. But the hope is that so these coaches they're all qualified really to teach any of those workshops. There's an overall piece that we share with folks about why are we here, right? Why are we afraid of the word evangelism? What does the Angus poll read say, right, from 2017, I think it was. What are some of the reasons why our polity, our history, and so forth has gotten us to the place we're in? And then we would launch into a workshop on one of those 6 topics. But because of the way the coaches were trained, they are all essentially capable of sort of leading any of those workshops. And I'm avoiding the use of the word teach, because I think that there's a danger there that people don't sort of own the learning if we just pour, open brains, pour into heads, and then walk out of the room. The workshop is set up so that any coach can go in, give a little bit of that overview. And then if you're doing, for example, missional small groups, let's say, there is a format that basically says, what are you currently doing in this area? Because all of us are doing something, right? We may not acknowledge it or recognize it yet, but we're all doing something. So what are we already doing? So naming sort of the context already. Then there's the piece around scripture. So what does scripture say about missional small groups or your community or communication or whatever? So we integrate some scriptural passages and discuss that as a group and say, what do we see here? What's our call? And then finally, they talk about, what does this look like if we engaged in this particular area missionally in our church, in our town, with our people, right? And so it's really about the people engaging the idea, but making it real for them. Because for me to say, oh, it's really missional to, I don't know, do something, put on something on your front lawn and everybody shows up and, but, well, that's great, but that might work for my church. It might not work for yours. So it's about bringing the folks in the parish at the parish level to a place where they can envision that missional piece in their context. And then the final piece is for them to make a commitment to something, even if it's one tiny thing, and then revisit it, right? Because we all know, right? If you set a goal, unless you set a goal when you're going to check back, it's not going to work, right? So that's basically how the workshops work. It's probably better in person, but we have, unfortunately, just because of our circumstances, right, we haven't been able to do them in person. But that's the idea, is that people would go in person, and it would be the better part of the day for that workshop. Gives lots of time for feedback.
And so, Pilar, how do these workshops get rolled out in the parishes? Is it the parish that requests it, or is this a suggestion made by you or the bishop or a regional dean or something? And I'm always curious about the uptake. Sometimes it's a difficult conversation to have about how we might reframe understanding missional ministry. So just curious about that.
Yeah, so in my experience, top-down stuff doesn't always work real well. And yet it needs to be supported from the top down. Otherwise, it's probably not going to function. So there's this weird kind of push and pull a little, right? So that's partly why we started with a combination of lay people and clergy, for starters. We also we reached out to certain groups. The town hall approach was on purpose, right? We wanted everyone to be able to get a sense and ask questions from broadly across the diocese. And we used some of those questions that we got to reframe some of the ways that we were doing things. So we allowed the process to inform us. But we have had requests from parishes. One parish actually, they wanted the workshops, like all of them, like right now. And so that's great. There is some of that, but there's both. There's sort of like, would you be willing to take part in this one, to help us learn how to do the workshop better? And so it's been a both and, I think, Lisa, to be fair.
Good. Yeah.
Chris Ross says this is the trickiest bit.
Oh, which bit, Chris?
Which bit, Chris? Is that the going into parishes bit, or?
Yes, yeah, maybe. If that's what he's saying, I would agree. It is
right.
The trickiest bit. It's the trickiest bit to get people on board, right? Because there's always the sense that, oh yeah, here's another great idea, right? Let's go to the workshop and everybody not do anything in 5 years, or in 5 months for that matter. So there is a bit of that, right? But I think the proof's in the pudding, really, right? So if something's going to work, great, it's going to work, right? And if it's not, then it isn't. And I'm okay with either way, to be honest. But it is something to be mindful of, for sure. How you approach it and how you.
I like that you're building on the parishes or the region's strengths, seeing what they're already doing, and helping them to recognize that this is a missional opportunity and what they're doing, who they are.
Yeah, Lisa, the thing is, you and I both know cookie cutters don't work, right? Just like we are all clergy, but we are all clergy differently, right? And that's lovely, really. But there's sort of temptation to cookie cutter these things. And oh yeah, you can do the same thing in Montreal as you can do in Calgary. Well, we know that's not true. We would never do that with a number of other areas of our lives, but we seem to want to do that with these kinds of projects or workshops and things. So yeah, to make it deeply personal means you're going to own it in a way that you won't, right? Yeah, Chris just said, sorry, there's no organic relationship. Yeah, I completely agree. That it has to come from the ground up, right? Yeah. And so part of that is informing them about why it's important.
Yeah.
Why does this matter, right? It's not just because Jesus said so, although he did.
Yeah. But there's also so much people can do, but sometimes we need a little help visualizing that, grasping that, getting out of the, we know that the sort of attractional approach long ago doesn't work. If we're still waiting for people to somehow miraculously show up at our doors. We're going to wait a long time. And yet there's so much that we can do.
Yes. Yeah, we're walking advertising.
Yeah.
Right. We're all walking in and out of our buildings. Well, maybe not now, but with a sign that says, "I love Jesus, want to join me?" All the time we do it. We just don't realize we're doing it. Right? Yeah.
But what does it look like? I mean, I wanted to pack this idea. I love the idea of, churches kind of coming up with missional ideas in their context. I think that's really important. But also, what do we mean by a missional opportunity? That's what kind of things their parish is sort of doing. But are they saying, yeah, actually, we could do that? What are the things?
Right. Well, I mean, part of it is we do everything we do because of Jesus, right? So there's that. But how are we sharing the hope of the gospel, right, in everything we do? So, organizational culture is an interesting one, right? So what are we saying with our budget, right? When we plan our budget, are we allowing for missional work, like not just a line item, right? I don't just mean, oh, look, mission and outreach item. I don't mean that, although that's good. But I mean things like how are we organizing ourselves around the idea, right? Is it if there's a word that we use amongst us as coaches, and we always talk about mindset. So is your mindset one of reaching out, right, and sharing the hope of Jesus with other people, or is your mindset one of how can we keep the building running, right? When we're asking those kinds of questions, we're so far from missional, because it's not about keeping a building running, right, or putting the electricity bill to rest. Those are important things. We want to do those things, but that's not missional thinking. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Keep going. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like we often say in the stewardship world, people want to support a cause. A roof is not a cause. A budget is not a cause. And I mean, I'm trying to pick up on the idea of like the context that there are missional opportunities all around parishes. Right in the places they're in.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, again, it really is a mindset. Nobody would argue with you that Jesus is a great guy, right? Or that Jesus is the reason we're joining together, right? No one's going to really argue that, I don't think, or I don't think they should at the church. But what we do is we make the stuff that we think is valuable or has become valuable to us, right? The centerpieces. How are we dressing the altar for Christmas? That's important. I mean, it does create an ambiance and an experience of worship that's valuable, for sure. But when we're setting the altar, do we think about what the visitor's going to see, right? Do we wonder about the visitor? Do we preach that way? Like I've heard, I think Jenny Anderson has done this, and so has, I think I've heard Susan Bell do this as well. When they preach, they assume that there's visitors there. Do we have that kind of mindset, right? Do we make the assumption that someone might be listening, right, that maybe doesn't really know who this Jesus guy is, right? Do that. So it is really kind of a shift of mindset, I think. That's probably the hardest thing.
Sounds like, Pilar, that this missional coaching is really integrating mission as part of the, as our existing, but emphasizing the DNA of our congregations, rather than kind of, sometimes people think mission is just another one of those branches of ministry. It's just one of those things we tack on if we have time, with some leftovers maybe. But this sounds like it's fully integrative into the life of the community. Is that the kind of the
Yes, absolutely.
The whole series?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's the whole point of it. Yeah. The whole point of it is that it should just become part of the way that we think and live and move and have our being, right? One of the things that's been interesting, I think I said something about this earlier, with the whole spiritual autobiography piece. It never occurred to me that spiritual autobiography, which is a spiritual formation kind of piece, could be linked somehow to one of our workshops. Until we had people that had come to our workshops talk about their story, right, their faith story. Because one of the things in that workshop is talking about, well, what about your story, right? Where have you experienced Jesus? Where where has the Holy Spirit acted in your life, or what and so it's interesting because from that came this whole idea. I just mentioned it off the cuff at one of our workshops. We now have 26 people, I think, signed up for spiritual autobiography class. So,
Wow.
which is fantastic because what they're trying to do is get a hold of their story, so that when it comes up naturally in conversation, and it does occasionally, that you can, as Paul, advises us, always have a reason why you believe what you believe, right? Always have an answer for your faith. And so without being the, John 3:16 placard holder at the on this corner, right? How can we share the story of how God is active in our life? Because, beautiful liturgy, which we have, and, lovely teas and lovely experiences that we have in our parish lives are important to us, but they may not be as meaningful to other people unless our lives have been transformed. If you don't understand how your life has been transformed, right, by the power of our Trinitarian God, it's kind of hard to share that, right? And I noticed more and more that the people that talked about that, the word evangelism is a scary word, partly because of stuff we have in the back of our minds, right? Placards and people talking about turning and burning and so forth. But when we know our story and we're listening and curious to other people, we can see where that story, again, might intertwine, right? Where we can be encouraging, where we can share that piece.
Some rich stuff here. I just want to say, first of all, hello to Anderson and hello to Bill Gray. Bill Gray, it's always great to see you. We got to catch up sometime. I miss you, Bill. And some really great comments. Like Chris says, this is going back a bit ago, he says, this challenges us to be more than social clubs, and that makes people uncomfortable. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think, but I love the way I love the way you're linking that to spiritual autobiography. I find that really key.
Well, it's no cleverness on my part. It was a natural outcropping of people's. I was trying to listen to what people were needing from it, and realizing, wow, this is a piece that could be helpful to people when they're trying to formulate their personal stories.
Yeah. Drew Walker says, faith story is the most important tool I use when I preach. Chris says, especially in a postmodern context. I think that's quite important because I think people today are very open to talking spiritually. And sometimes, to use natural church development language, we're the ones who don't score well in passionate spirituality. We don't like talking about that. And yet you keep coming back to Jesus Christ. I mean, that's quite challenging. It's one thing, a lot of people say, well, I serve, I'm evangelistic, I do that in action. But you're taking us back to story, and you're taking us back to Christ. And keep saying, well, actually, there's someone we have to share here.
It's interesting, Neil, because the quote that Anglicans love to use is the one, that's always attributed to St. Francis: preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words. And I always laugh at it's the perfect Anglican quote, right? Because that excuses us. It gets us all off the hook. Oh, I don't have to use words because I just go do good stuff and people will just automatically know Jesus. But there is millions of people in the world that are fantastic human beings that are not Jesus lovers, right? And I'm not judging that one way or the other. I'm just saying that's not all there is to it. Right? We are certainly his hands and his feet, and we do it because we love the world that God created for us. Absolutely, I am all about going out and helping your neighbor for sure. But if you want transformation in their life, you're gonna have to talk about Jesus at some point. It just doesn't happen by helping someone with their groceries, right? It's more to it than that for sure.
As Brandon Whitworth says, it's necessary to use words more often than we think. And that's absolutely right.
Thank you, Brandon. You're right. Yes. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But I think, as I said, people are actually very interested in having those conversations. And sometimes we're the ones who aren't. Andy says we all have a storyline in the lived gospel. I love that.
It's interesting that words, Brandon's comment, it's necessary to use words more often than we think. I think, the danger that we have in this is that we think we have to have the right words or we're trying to convince people. And the minute you sense that, for me, the minute you sense that I'm trying to convince you to believe X, Y, and Z, you're in trouble.
Right.
Because what we really want to do is listen really hard, right, for what other people are saying and go, ah, there it is, right? There's the moment, right? So if we ourselves, and here I'm going back to formation, right? If we ourselves, if our spiritual life is healthy and vibrant, and we are intentionally seeking relationship with the one whom we're seeking to share, right? Then God will show us those moments, right? We've all had those moments where you think, oh, geez, I wonder how Lisa's doing, but do you pick up a phone and call Lisa? Like, I actually think that's a bit of a, tap on the shoulder from the Holy Spirit, so to speak, right? And when we're listening carefully to the person across from us, we will see the opening. And if we know our story and we're listening and we see an opening, I mean, it's not actually that difficult, right? But in terms of all the other areas that we might be missional, it really partly is about mindset for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, Anderson says we need to start listening. It's absolutely right. We're not a list. That's part of the thing, be a listening people, but ready with that story, knowing your story.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everyone likes a good story, Andrew. Yeah.
Yes.
True. Yeah.
Well, and it means that we don't all have to be scholars or have, the right kind of theological language. I think if you're telling your own story, it's real. It's so authentic. And people, often they have difficulty with the church, but they're often curious about Jesus, even if they don't believe he's the Son of God. There's something about Jesus who's very attractive. And if someone is living kind of radical grace, that they're curious about that. I mean, I love what Michael Frost says about living questionable lives. I mean, just loving, extravagantly grace-filled lives that people say, hey, and it's not that you're a saint either. I think, sometimes we can come off that way. I think, but if you use your own words, wow, that's just, that's so much more powerful hearing that from someone telling their own story. Yeah.
It's interesting. I just happened to look at Sylvia's comment on, I think there's a difference between intentional and unintentional. And I love what she's saying there because there's an element of, I don't want to say there's one or the other, right? I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that I think, missional work in terms of outreach is a bad idea. Because I do think that there's an invitation there for people to go, what's going on and what motivates that person?
Yes.
So by all means that there's an opening there, right? And sometimes I think she talks about unintentional, and I want to say that one of the things that I had to do in my defense was sort of defend the idea, because my definition of spiritual formation starts with the word intentional. And it sounded like I was saying it's our job to be formed. It's our job to do that. And that's not at all what I would suggest. Quite often the Holy Spirit will come in and go, did you notice that just, I mean, with me, probably more often than with you and Neil, but I notice a lot of times, wow, that was that was not intended by me, right? Mm-hmm. Obviously the Holy Spirit used that conversation somehow. Mm-hmm. But I think, again, it's because we are immersed in our own formation, in our own story enough, alongside the Holy Spirit that we are guided into those kinds of conversations. So I think it's a both and. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I love that comment. Yeah.
Bastard says we need to share stories, not orate stories. I think that's right, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think I don't know if this is what she means, but the idea that we preach to someone, but in the negative term, right? We preach at somebody about something. Well, you should do this, right? We only share our story insofar as it is helpful to somebody else in their story, right? Yeah.
And it's fascinating. I mean, listening to stories is one of the most interesting things. I mean, we had Leanne Matthews on a couple of weeks ago to talk about our supper club, which is a dinner church. And that's created a safe place for people to share their stories. And it's absolutely fascinating. And so people are very keen to share their stories. It's not like we have to go and sort of somehow find these people. They're all around us and we're willing to listen. Yeah. And it's really interesting to hear.
Yeah.
And we have a story as well, in an appropriate way of sharing our own.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People identify the graced moments or where God showed up for them. And I think if we're good at doing that ourselves, whether it's through Examine or through spiritual biography, or we can identify where God is at work, we can help others say, that looks like, you know, a holy moment. What do you think? You know, and draw that out of them. So they can start to identify, hey, yeah, God has been at work in my life too. Like, you know, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And when we have eyes to see, right, we can share that set of eyes with someone else. And it's a much less intimidating way to go about it. Than thinking that we have to have the right answer, that, the idea that we 4-8 our story. I think that's great. It's not what we want to do, actually. We want to only share it insofar as it helps others, open their eyes to the same beauty and grace that we have experienced, right? That's the point. The point is not to chastise or judge someone, but actually to draw them in to a relationship with a God who loves you, right?
Yeah.
And wants your best, wants your fullness, wants,
Well, looking at the time, we only have about 10 minutes. We've already been going for 50 minutes. But Andy says, is paying attention intentional ministry? Great question.
Paying attention, intentional ministry.
I think that's like contextual listening, isn't it? Really, it's that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say yes. I mean, listening, really listening.
And so what would churches be doing? I mean, there is this aspect of being able to tell our stories, but then, are we talking about maybe developing dinner churches, or what sort of things do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. There's some churches that, again, right, context is everything. So there is some churches who, there's one great story about a church that has a teddy bear ministry.
What?
And a teddy bear ministry.
I love it.
Yeah, it's a great story. And so what they did was they saw that the local police station was handing this really ratty teddy bear to when they went to domestic stops or visits. And so they would go to these domestic stops. Often they had to take the children out and sit in the squad car. And so they would have this ratty little teddy bear. And someone from the church went to visit the station for some other reason and saw this ratty teddy bear. Anyway, long story short, it became a ministry to the point where the people not only made new teddy bears for every kid that was in these cars, but actually ended up sitting with the children in the car. So these things, like, it's about eyes being open for the opportunity, right? So that's one ministry that happened. And it ended up, that some of these police officers actually ended up coming to the church for worship services. They came for events because they're like, oh, you're the teddy bear church, right? So that's probably maybe a silly example, but it is something where people saw the love of Christ in those people, right? And they filled the need, and it became somewhere where they could actually invite the questions of faith, right? Eventually, right? But sometimes it takes time to get there. The other workshops, things like organizational culture, it might be as simple as starting with a missional budget line, right? And then becoming more and more aware of all the opportunities in which we can spend that money, for example, right? There's lots of different examples, but they really are contextual, Neil. So,
that is, teddy bear ministry sounds very contextual. I love that.
Yeah, but that might not work in your church, right? You have to think about the opportunities as they present themselves in your own context. Yeah.
But I think those are the great stories. Sometimes it's just someone paying attention, right?
Yeah.
Like your eyes are open and you see something, and it's like, okay, wow.
Yeah,
we can do that.
And really, it's about helping, just like showing the lens, right? Showing the camera lens to them about their own context and saying, well, what things are you part of? What groups are you part of, right? What does your bulletin look like, right? There's a communications workshop. That's one of the first places. Does your bulletin sound like it's explaining things? I mean, the liturgy in the Anglican Church is pretty straightforward for those of us who are in it all the time. Yeah. But if somebody new walks through your door, they're making a decision about staying there in the first 5 minutes. So your bulletin matters. Your parking signs matter.
Yeah.
Right? Your signage outside matters. But these are all things that, as we're in our own buildings, like I don't think about, my office is, I need more pictures here. I don't think about that when I walk in every day. But when someone else walks into my office and says, oh, there's kind of a blank spot there, right? Then I go, oh, right. So it's just about helping people see their context in those different areas. I've stopped paying attention to the feed.
Oh, there's so many comments.
Yeah, it's great.
People they're talking about Whereas Astrid says, it always amazes me when my God incidences are of interest to others in conversation. But they are these God incidences, eh?
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot about paying attention and active listening.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, Astrid, you got lots of great questions and statements. It always amazes me when God incidences are of interest to others. You know, how could they not be?
Yeah.
You know, like if God is as fascinating as creating the human brain, right? Blades of grass and the Rocky Mountains, how could you not be fascinated by the work God does in someone's life, right? Yeah, and the thing is, I think the trick is not that it's fantastical, right? It's not that someone's got a story that's, oh, you know, like Paul on the road to Damascus, like I got knocked over and I was blind for 3 days. It's just that we recognize that our lives are different and richer and fuller because of that relationship. We have been transformed, right? I had a professor in one of my classes who was one of the gentlest guys you've ever met. I mean, really just, you know, I can't even explain it. Just there's a piece about him that was astonishingly attractive. And yet he told us that before he began certain spiritual disciplines, he had a real anger issue, that he really struggled with it. And I just didn't see that at all. But that was so interesting to me. I engaged him more in conversation a couple of times because I thought, what is that about? And I'm someone who can say, yeah, I've definitely experienced God and transformation in my life, but I'm still curious about other people's transformation, right? And so I think that, again, that listening and that being curious and knowing our story, I think all of those things are part of, sharing a message that's hopeful, really, right?
Absolutely. David says the attitude of the person handing out the bulletins matters, and that's absolutely right too, isn't it? But I was thinking that's true because I know with bulletins are a key little insider thing. Same thing with websites. Like, does your website communicate only to insiders, or if someone goes on your website, are they going to have any idea where you are or what you do? And
and a great trick I learned about that. It's not, I can't remember who taught me this, but go on a church website, but have somebody who doesn't go to church go with you. And so, can you show me what do you think this church is saying? Ooh. Right? Like, what do you think what are they talking to you about? Because there's one church who shall remain nameless, but their website, first of all, hasn't been updated since 2010 or something. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have to be updated every day, but I mean, it's been a while. And when you look at their website, all of the language is Anglicanese, right? Or churchese. So they even have the word hermeneutic in one of their top, like, oh no, what does that even mean? And so there's all this sort of church language, and we forget the collect of the day. Like, what is that? We know what it is, but it's insider language. And so what we're saying is, you got to be one of us to figure us out. Right. I don't think that's what Jesus intended. No, and I don't think we intended that either at the beginning. Right? To be fair, right? I don't think we intended it.
That idea of having someone look at your website who's not a church person and to say, what do you think? Wow, that's a great tip.
Yeah, it was one of the things in our communication workshop, right? The communication coach who was teaching us showed us different websites. So, and she actually said to us, what do you think this church is telling us? Right. What message is this church sending, right? And so you'll see it when you start looking at websites. But again, right, so there's that mindset, like, oh, interesting, what are we saying when we post about the strawberry tea, but don't give anybody any context about what that's about, right? What are we saying when every one of our events is a fundraiser? Mm-hmm. Like, what are we saying, right? And it might be a really good message, right? I'm not trying to be critical. I mean, it might be a really powerful, good message, but it also might be unhelpful to draw people to see people that actually love Jesus, right?
Yeah. I think we're going to have you back because we're running out of time. We have to have that whole conversation. Pilar, thank you so much. How can we pull all this together? I mean, I guess in my mind right now, I'm thinking about spiritual autobiographies and missional opportunities. If I was to try to, can you summarize in 1 minute or two? What can I mean, I was going to say, if anyone wants to find out more, go to the Diocese of Calgary website and click under ministries, and you'll see information about your missional coaching. to find out more.
And I think there's a box in there that you can ask questions to, which comes
Yeah.
through. You know, I think in terms of like knowing our story, I guess, that particular piece, and spiritual autobiography and mission, I think the thing that I've learned recently is that we need to not just have a story that's sort of told in order to convince somebody. That's not the point of spiritual autobiography. The point of spiritual autobiography is to have a deeper relationship with the one who created us in the first place. And knowing that relationship and understanding how God has formed us and how we have entered or not into that relationship over time allows us to see not only how God has acted, how God will act possibly in the future with us, because we see patterns. And it allows us to begin to have eyes to see the moments in other people's lives when they share them with us. So again, it's not about having a scripted story or having the right answer at the right time, but it's about walking alongside other people, right, who maybe have not experienced the God that we all know has transformed our lives, but being able to speak into their lives in a way that's hopeful, right, and that introduces this Jesus guy as someone who matters, right, and who they want to meet, not because it's a notch in your belt,
Right.
but because it's actually something that will transform them. And if we have been transformed and we've watched that transformation happen, right, by autobiography or some other method, then we will be more ready to say, oh, but he will. But he will.
Mm.
Right?
That's great.
That's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Chris says, love God intensely and know how God loves you intensely. Everything will fall into place.
Yeah. You got some great people on this. You should have invited them to speak. They're great.
I know.
So great, you guys.
We're going to follow up with some of you. And thank you to everybody who's been participating. Jeffrey, also, it's great to hear from you up in the Yukon. Pilar, thank you so much for your time today. This has been fascinating.
My pleasure. Thank you. This has been super fun, you guys.
And we'll look forward to carrying this on in the new year, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
So
Now, Neil mentioned that this is a national conversation. I think just to get our plug in there, Pew and Beyond is an initiative of the Spiritual Formation for Discipleship Network of the Anglican Church of Canada. And we have a Facebook group as well with all kinds of resources on there. So if you want to go and visit us there, this network, we'd love to have you join us there and next week.
Absolutely. We'll be here next week. And we're going to move up farther west to Vancouver next week. So yay. And talk about spiritual formation some more. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks you for your questions and comments. And Pilar, thank you so much.
Thank you both. This is so great you guys are doing this.
Good to see you
So
again.
glad we connected. This is You and Beyond, episode 8. Signing out.